Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of What's Kraken. This week, we are joined by Ian Burley, who is the Supervisor of Analytics and Insights at Revolution. Seems to be getting a promotion every other week. I'm trying to keep up on LinkedIn with this guy. And they're a company that are focused on integrated sports marketing. It's a pleasure to have you. And today, we're going to be talking about data, sponsorships, fan engagement in sports. So let's get cracking. Now, to start off, Ian, tell the folks a little bit about your background. How did you start in sports? How did you get where you are today? Maybe the jerseys are a giveaway for those that are watching on video. I'll let you do the intro here.
Yeah, absolutely. So first of all, thanks for having me. I'm excited to kind of join you guys and talk about everything that we're going to talk about in data and sports and how we're using it as an agency and how you use it as kind of a vendor in the digital activation space. But in terms of my story and kind of what led me where, born and raised in Michigan, here in the United States. I know you're over up north in Canada, so I figure I should add in that I'm in the United States.
Not just Michigan. Tell them the city. Tell them where we're really from.
So I'm from Otsego, Michigan, a small town of 4,000 people. Cornfields, cows, the whole 9 yards. Proverbial Michigan kid, went to the University of Michigan. And that was kind of my first entrance into actually working in the sports space, as I worked for the football team while I was at Michigan.
Go Blue.
Yes, sir. Absolutely. Every day of the week. Studied in the business school at Michigan, which is a BBA program, and did a dual degree in sports marketing. So at that point, sports management. At that point, I kind of realized that I had this interest in kind of the duality of sports and business and how they're integrated in many different ways. And at the same time, I was, in a Michigan football building every single day for 4 years. So I got to kind of see the very team-centric, sport-centric side of things from like an operational standpoint, but also got to learn about business as a whole, as well as kind of sports business and how those all kind of play. So ultimately, I started my career outside of sports, which is something I know you and I have in common. I worked at a company called Steelcase, which is an office furniture manufacturer here in Michigan, number one in the world, I believe.
Love it.
Market leader in the office furniture space. Worked there in a internal procurement role for a couple of years, and knew that ultimately wanted my career to be in sports. Looked at some options of what's kind of the best way to do that as somebody who's still relatively early on in their career, and landed on the Warsaw program at Oregon in the MBA program, which is where our paths crossed and where we got to watch the GOAT, whose jersey we are both proudly repping, put it on for the city of Eugene for a handful of years, which was awesome. So we went through the program for 2 years and we graduated in 2019. And that was what brought me to Revolution, where I've been kind of now for the last 2 years and change.
And now look at us, titans of industry, two short years. But so, yeah, that's a little look into your background. Ian and I spent 2 years at the University of Oregon sports business MBA program. Really excellent program. I think it's the top one out there. Ohio and then, San Diego State and USF might have arguments about that, but no one does it better than Oregon. Now you're at Revolution. You've just been ascending through the ranks like crazy. Tell us a little bit about Rev and what you guys do.
Yeah, so you kind of mentioned it a little bit at the beginning, right? But at Revolution, we're an integrated sports marketing company. We're privately owned. We're celebrating our 20-year anniversary this year, actually, 20 years in business. So kind of a big milestone for our president and owner. And when we say integrated sports marketing, what we mean by that is our clients are predominantly brands, and we work to have kind of service teams that kind of provide assistance to brands in the sports marketing space, kind of in an end-to-end process, right? So my team specifically, we kind of live in the strategy and the measurement portion, which kind of happens at the upfront throughout the life of the partnership, and then certainly at the end of partnerships or just at the end of years within partnerships. But then we have verticals just like most other agencies have, right? We have our client services teams with dedicated account teams. we have a media buying arm, we have Marcom and PR, we have creative services who would do a lot of creative strategy as well as just pumping out creative assets that are needed. We have a hospitality team, an in-house production team, an on-site activation team. So we really want to be a one-stop shop for brands who are looking to activate and spend marketing dollars in the sports space.
Right, right. And so from your perspective, working in that, partnership, data analytics space, what are some of the major challenges that you find these brands have in working with these teams and leagues in terms of their data strategy?
Yeah, it's interesting, right? Even when you just think about like businesses at a macro level, before you even get into sports business, data is something that is kind of continuously being integrated into how people are making decisions, right? And so in the sports industry, kind of as brands who are working in sports are beginning to use more data-driven kind of models to make decisions for their own businesses, that includes kind of integrating that into how they choose sports marketing partners and different partnerships and that type of thing. So it's kind of been interesting to see the evolution of the problem, I suppose, over the past decade or so, where at the beginning of kind of this journey of using data in sports partnerships, there wasn't enough data. People didn't know what data to ask for, didn't know what to look at. And now we've reached a point where there's almost a surplus of data. And there's so much data that everybody is collecting that now the question is really, what do you do with the data and how do you make it meaningful and actionable? And I think that's what not only us, but really everybody, I think probably in the agency space and the brand space and on the property side are all really striving to kind of fine tune, like what data is most important, how do we make it meaningful, and how do we make it actionable within these partnerships?
I know, thinking back to our Oregon days, I think it was Bettina who said, data is only as valuable as it is timely. So using that data, in a timely and, hopefully automated way so that as soon as I get that data, I can then use that data to maybe convert that fan to a ticket buyer, to a merch buyer, to some sort of follow-up action. So how, working as an agency, how do you kind of see brands focusing more on using that data in a timely fashion, and the brands that you guys specifically work with, is it mostly generating leads? Is it exposure? Is it, what do you are you involved at all into what they kind of do with that data? Or are you more just kind of on the analytics side and kind of how that's collected?
Yeah, it's a little bit of both. And it really depends on the client. Some of our clients have come in and they've already been very well entrenched in kind of aggregating and collecting data, both from third-party vendors who do, different like social scrubs and collecting data from on-site activations, all that type of stuff, right? Like that's an entire world in its own. But we also have clients who part of kind of our scope with them is helping them understand what data to ask for, where to find it, and all that type of stuff. So it's kind of, there's a lot of things going on there. And one of the things that we really try to do first, and it's kind of around like creating context around the data, which we've kind of touched on. And that's all really goes into like helping us benchmark, right? So it's like, if we're ultimately going to measure things, we need to measure them against something. So creating those benchmarks in kind of like an apples to apples way versus kind of apples to oranges is always a big, I think, struggle and a key point for brands, and then obviously the agencies that work for them. But in terms of kind of making that data able to be measured and then what to do with it, we also kind of live in multiple places, and it just depends on the client. Sometimes we're doing that data tracking all the way throughout, and we're able to kind of get that data on behalf of their third-party vendors, on behalf of the properties, and really kind of provide that analysis and understand, are there tweaks that we can make to asset packages, or is there an asset that's not performing well, and why isn't it performing well? And we can arm our client teams and our brand partners kind of with that knowledge so that they can have ongoing conversations with their properties throughout like current seasons of partnerships, which has been something new for us and I think has been really powerful. But then kind of at the end of the year, everybody does recaps. We kind of do the same thing where we go through our measurement framework, and not only just like provide that to brands, but also then provide the takeaways. Like, what does this mean in the context of your partnership, especially as you go forward into the upcoming years of that partnership, where applicable.
And for you guys, are you mostly working on, say I'm a brand who's in the, has a league, a team partner. Are you mostly helping facilitate and kind of providing insights on physical activations, or is it more digital? And how has that maybe ratio changed a bit in the last 2 years since COVID?
Yeah, it's both. Especially this year, we've had a lot more on-site activations come back in the States. But we collect data on both. So we're looking at social and digital activations, whether it's literally pure social posts across, the variety of channels, as well as particular digital activations like sweepstakes and things that are driving people to different microsites. So we're analyzing that data. And we're also analyzing on-site data and kind of to get kind of back full circle to talking about like what's the goal of some of these. Lead generation is always key, right? Like everybody wants to be able to create leads and ultimately create sales. So that's always something that we look at and have a lens for things that are applicable. Now we see that both with on-site things as well as digital. There's lead generation that happens at both places, but there's also so many other goals and objectives that brands have when it comes to their sport partnerships. So we're, brand awareness, brand reach, frequency, how often is our brand in front of people via our sports partnerships? Does our portfolio allow us to be a constant presence in the space throughout the year? Or do we have kind of like hot periods because we're only involved in certain sports? So it's really all dependent on the goals and objectives of our clients. But those are conversations that we always love to have up front, right? When we want to understand goals and objectives, that helps us guide them where to go. And then in our opinion, if we're having those conversations up front, that's already setting up a future partnership to be more successful because you already know what you're looking for and you already almost kind of know what you're going to ultimately measure. So you can have those upfront conversations with teams or leagues or events or whatever it may be, and kind of just be more educated about what you need from each other in the partnership.
And outside of kind of more simplified metrics, we're looking at, these activations. Are you guys using any third party in terms of like the valuation standpoint of like, this is like, for instance, with brand awareness, are you guys providing surveys, follow-ups with fans, or are you kind of outsourcing that to understand, affinity, awareness, like metrics that are outside of kind of that raw numerical data?
Yeah, we do a little bit of both. We have a first party or like a first person, I suppose, research department within Rev who can do consumer surveys and kind of measure brand lift and brand affinity and consideration set changes within particular partnerships. So we do have the ability to do that, and we get scope to do that, both for kind of like one-off clients who they just bring us in to do that, as well as some of our kind of like AOR clients. But for other things, we do rely on third party and looking at like what media value they give to things, whether it's broadcast or social. And a lot of times that decision in those relationships are being driven by the brands currently versus agencies kind of holding licenses and agreements with those kind of larger collection and measurement agencies.
Right.
At least from kind of what we see in practice currently.
And so, I think the last couple of years have been interesting because we've seen some new players come into the sports partnership space. I'm thinking about sports betting partners, NFTs, crypto. What kind of trends are you guys seeing maybe in those spaces or different spaces? And what are you kind of excited about for 2022?
Yeah, the category changes or additions is super interesting, right? It's something that we keep an eye on to understand, are these places that we should be prospecting? Should we be going out and trying to bring clients and brands in those categories into kind of our agency and where can we help them? So that's certainly happening, right? And we're seeing people make splashes versus just testing the water. Crypto, FTX has spent like $500 million over the past couple months, essentially. So that seems like a fundamental change, right? Like talking to brands over the past few years, if people are looking to first get into sports marketing, or maybe first looking to get into something like gaming and esports, or a sport that they've never been involved in, or even just like influencer marketing in general, they want to test, right? They want to test, understand the feasibility before they kind of allocate a whole bunch of budget towards it. And with some of these new categories, sports betting, crypto, I don't know if it's just because they got the money or what, but like they're just going all in.
They're throwing it out.
Naming rights deals, which are not only big money,
FTX Arena for the Heat.
That's long term, right? That's like a 20-year deal. So that's really interesting to see. And from a data perspective, what we're kind of looking forward to and always working towards is kind of automating some of our internal processes. So kind of taking things that now are a little bit manual from a just like collection standpoint, and finding ways to best automate that and make it more real time, not only to allow us as an agency more time to analyze and kind of generate insights from it, but also to give more visibility to our brand partners. And instead of having monthly or biannual or season kind of recap check-ins, allowing them to understand data in real time. And then it gets back to what we kind of mentioned earlier of ultimately being able to have kind of ongoing conversations with partners in the midst of partnerships happening, so that they can make those changes and get the most out of it, and ultimately stay as kind of like satisfied partners for teams to be able to kind of have that longevity and not have a big churn in their partnership roster.
Yeah, it's interesting too with these new categories. They kind of want that data and that evaluation as quickly as possible, because if they're throwing this big money, they got to know it works. Whereas, an auto partner or something like that, they're probably doing pretty similar things year after year, maybe slight tweaks, and more of an annual review is probably more appropriate. And it's funny, I saw with these new emerging spaces like with FTX Arena, and I saw FTX, I think it was at the first Heat home game, gave $500 in crypto to like everyone in this certain area of spectators, which is crazy. And I was thinking back to a tweet I saw the other day where it was like this must have been in the early 2010s, and it was like some sort of esports tournament. It was like first place gets like $500, second place gets $300, third to fifth gets $100, and it was like seventh to 10th place gets 25 Bitcoin as their prize. And it's like, bruh, like if you knew how much that was worth now, like it's just funny how much that space has really evolved. And with the industry constantly changing like that, it reminded me of a question I wanted to ask you is, is there a skill that you now have to use a lot in your role that you wish, maybe it's a skill, maybe it's a program or a process that you wish you would have learned at school, whether at Michigan or during your MBA at Oregon, that you wish you would have learned that you are using so much now?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think we've kind of seen a little bit, probably more on like the team side, and especially on like the team side is broken up even into two places, right? You got the sports side and the business side. And especially on the sports side, they're doing like big time data mining, right? And data analysis, and using things like R and SQL and running big time data sets. And that's happening more at the team side as well on the business side, with analyzing CRM databases and kind of creating fan personas and understanding some of those kind of correlation coefficients and some of those fun like stats terms, right? So I think those are interesting things that we're already seeing them become more parts of curriculum. Like when we were at Oregon just 2 years ago, those classes were kind of like basic electives you could take, and I imagine that they're going to become kind of a more staple part of the program, just because it's something that the industry is needing. But when I think about my job and what we do and how we really have kind of found a lane to add value, it's even more of, I don't know if soft skills is the right word, but it's being able to, there's a couple things, right? It's one, it's being able to present data in a way that it doesn't alienate people who
or intimidate,
who haven't seen it before, or maybe have no idea what it means, right? So your first problem from a storytelling standpoint is trying to show that data in a way that it's easily digestible for people who may not understand it, or like you said, maybe downright kind of afraid of it, because it is a change and it is something new. So kind of understanding that and how to tackle that, I think, is something that you would do it in school. Maybe, I mean, we gave group projects and people had good questions and some heated debates and things like that. So you get used to kind of handling that stuff. But I think that's something that you just learn in practice. And the second part is, and I've kind of alluded to it a couple times, but it's the ability to then put that data into context and talk about what it means. What's the takeaway? What's the actionable next step? And I think that's something that people can work on at any point in their career. If you're in school, whether it's through a class project or something that you do on the side, if you're looking at doing things that are related to data and analyzing data, it's like there's two steps. First, you're going to get your analysis and kind of get the findings, but then you have to take those findings the next step. What do those findings mean? What do they mean in the context of the project, or in our case, the client, and even in like the sports marketing world as like a macro space? So I'm not 100% sure that those things can like fully be ironed out in school, but I think we were kind of exposed to enough of the industry and like that kind of style of thinking and approaching problems that we were set up well to be dropped into places and kind of be a sponge to everything that's going on around us, and be able to use that as context clues to kind of take the data and the recommendations to the next level.
Yeah, it's interesting too, because this was a question that was posed to me the other day, and I was thinking, there are certainly programs I'd like to be more efficient with. I wish I was more efficient in Photoshop and create like creative skills like that. It'd obviously be great to have some more kind of coding skills and things like that. And it's interesting because depending on where you land, you might be in a very big company where you're doing a very concentrated task that you were clearly hired for, or you might be at a small organization. You might be at a minor league baseball team, which you worked at. You might be at a WNBA team where maybe you are expected to do a number of different tasks, and being able to do some simple coding, being able to do some design, that's going to really help you. So yeah, I think a lot of time the onus is kind of on the student hey, I should learn Tableau because I might be presenting data to folks who aren't super data literate. Or I need to focus on my design skills because I might be the one tasked with not only coming up with this marketing idea, but then kind of executing it as well. So that's an interesting one. I appreciate your kind of, stance on that. And segueing into our next question, is there anything that you're really excited about that you're working on at the moment? This could be something career, it could be something personal, it could be a project. If you're able to kind of, let us in on something maybe work-wise or personal, that would be great.
Yeah. So the thing that kind of pops into my head is we're working on a couple current projects, and obviously I have to leave like client names and things out of it, but we're kind of working on a little bit of a reimagined way to do strategy for either brands who haven't been in the sports marketing space ever, or are maybe at a point where they are almost at a full stop and they're looking to completely reevaluate their portfolio and understand what parts of it are working or aren't working, where they could maybe make additions, where they could make subtractions, so on and so forth. And it's exciting because the way that we're trying to kind of build our process is really fully integrating the art and the science. So almost immediately, once you get into the sports marketing world, you hear this adage of sponsorship is an art and a science. It's a blend of the art and the science. And it's one of those things that's it's a cliche, but it's also true, and it's used quite a bit. But what we've seen, and some of this is anecdotally, of course, but from an agency standpoint, we've kind of felt like generally agencies from a strategy perspective either are heavily art led, meaning their creative groups really drive a lot of strategy, or they're heavily science led and their strategy offerings are driven by data. And what we're trying to do and what we're currently doing with a few clients is kind of test running this process where our data team, our analytics and insights team is working directly with our creative strategy team and kind of putting frameworks that allow for quantitative, qualitative, art, science within them to present and recommend a cohesive strategy that kind of checks all the boxes of where to play and how to play in terms of messaging, activation tactics, storytelling, things that you're not going to necessarily just get from the science. But that's what we're trying to do, right? And it's exciting to try something different, and to have so far kind of had good feedback from clients who maybe haven't seen that process before, or at least haven't seen it in practice. So that's been really exciting. It's cool to work with. I think we talked about this in grad school, like there's big C creatives and little C creatives. And to be able to work with big C creatives who can like listen to a CMO or a director of brand at a company and then digest that information and spit out incredible like messaging storylines and activation ideas. Like, I don't know how they do it, but it's really cool to see that work and to kind of work that into our process of how we ultimately recommend where to play and how to play for some of our brands. So that's something that we're very, very much in the middle of right now. And it's been exciting to kind of drive what feels like a little bit of a change within the industry from an agency standpoint.
Yeah, I imagine that's kind of the secret sauce that an agency would be looking to develop, is kind of touching on both those points. So that's really great to hear. On that point, you're obviously in the agency space. I'm on kind of the tech side of sports. Is there any advice that you have for folks who are looking to break into the industry? Obviously, both of us went to a sports business MBA. We wanted to work in the sports space. I think, I'll hold my own opinions, but I think that's a great way to get into sports. But I'd love to hear kind of what advice you would give for people who are in a position like us working outside of sports who want to get back into it or get a break into it in the first place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm going to flip this question back to you because I want to hear your thoughts before we segue to the next thing. But yeah, I think there's different paths people can take, right? And I think it's becoming easier for people to break in. I shouldn't say easier. I should say maybe more accessible for people to break in out of college, because the sport management track is growing across universities.
For sure.
Even in the past 5 to 10 years, you're
seeing more pop up.
There's so many more programs and teams and agencies and brands who are, have dedicated teams in their structure for sports marketing are understanding that these programs exist. And so those recruiting efforts are a little bit more targeted, I suppose. So I think that's helpful just from like that standpoint. I do think you and I both had a similar situation where we had kind of a first career for a handful of years. I think if you are going to go back to grad school, especially in really any type of business sense, whether it's just an MBA or a focused MBA in sports or kind of like the master's in sports marketing, I do really think that working for a couple of years in something is really powerful. It gives you a lot of context of just how business operates and gives you some of those experiences and I think might help your hireability versus being somebody who went just from undergrad to grad school. Now we had people who did that and it worked out fine, right? So everything works, but I think regardless of those scenarios, if you're looking to get into the industry, I think it's all about, there's a couple things that I think are important. One is understanding that your passion for sports, while very important and something that's probably a common theme throughout most of the people who work in the industry, it can't be reason 1A why you want to work in sports.
You can't just be a fan. Yeah.
You can't be a fan. You have to be a professional at any point in the industry. Like this is your job. And it's the way I phrase it is it's not all coffee and roses, right? Like there's parts of working at any part of the industry, even super close to a team, which we've both done, which are there super cool days? Absolutely. Some of the coolest days. Are there absolutely horrible days and days where you work 12 to 14 hours and, everything again, isn't coffee and roses? Yeah, absolutely. And if you come in just as somebody who is, just passionate about sports and just a fan, it might not be enough.
Right.
And I think it's also not necessarily enough for a company to, or for you to kind of distinguish yourself from a company. So then I think you have to go the step further.
Mm-hmm.
And whether it's through undergrad or through a grad program or just through your own kind of passion, really having an understanding and being able to speak the language of
Mm-hmm.
what sports marketing is, because sports marketing is even different than like CPG marketing or general brand marketing. So being able to have those conversations, if you go back to even like some of the different tools and things we talked about, like maybe you're not a master of all of them, but if you can speak the language and kind of be able to serve as a conduit between the people who know them really well and the people who need to understand the outputs, like there's a space for that, like 100%. So I think just that ability to kind of pay attention to the industry, read. I mean, I think reading and just paying attention not only to what's going on the court or on the field, because that permeates into sports marketing, but what's happening from a business, how businesses are and how brands are operating in the space, how teams are operating as businesses. I kind of think that's a way for people to set themselves apart in like an interview process. And I think maybe the last thing, all of a sudden on a very long-winded answer here, that's interesting to me is like, you probably aren't going to walk out of college into your perfect job.
Right.
And so I think having that open mind to try something that maybe at one point you kind of had your blinders on towards, or where you were so focused on maybe the dream job that you didn't understand that there were maybe some other opportunities where you could get the skills and experiences and put the tools in your toolbox that you need for that ultimate dream job, right? You can have that kind of zigzag path and it doesn't have to be linear. I think especially in sports where, let's be honest, it's more difficult than most industries to break into. I think that ability and that flexibility to, especially at an entry level, be willing to go into a place and learn as much as you can and kind of get that foot in the door. And then you can start to understand what areas you like more than others. But it can be difficult if you're looking for that dream job right out of college. And that goes really across any industry, I think, not just sports.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that, like the two real bits of insight I have is, one, there's a lot of jobs outside of teams and leagues. Like people often think, I want to work in sports, I want to work for this team. And it's like you said, it's not all coffee and roses, it's long hours. It's maybe not the best pay going in. And, very quickly that NBA, NFL, WNBA star, you realize they're just a human being when you see them up close and interact with them. Like they're just humans who are incredibly good at that sport. And the other thing is that, whether it's, going to some sort of graduate program or networking or whatever it is, like you said, you really need to have an understanding of what it is you want to do and how you're going to eventually get there. And, I think for both of us, having worked in on the team side, we're now obviously not on the team side. I think being on the team side really did help me get to where I am today. And you often just need to kind of get your foot in the door somewhere in sports. I think that's really important. So I think a lot of teams and leagues and kind of tangential vendors and third parties who work in sports, they're going to want to see something like that. So I think you have to be willing to kind of sacrifice a lot to work in sports. And that's a big one of, hey, maybe it's a year you're working for a lot less than you had a previous job. And I know that was the case for both of us, where we came from industries where maybe we were getting paid a little bit more and kind of had to take a pay cut to work in sports. And you really do have to be, willing to sacrifice and yeah, see if this really is an industry you want to stay in. And you might be a huge NBA, NFL fan, but maybe you realize that, I know for me was the case that, hey, I much more enjoy kind of being that third party that works with those teams, but not necessarily in them. So we're coming up to the end here. We always want to ask people this because, we're a fan engagement, fan data company. What is your most memorable fan moment? Being a huge sports fan, coming from Michigan, what really stands out for you?
Man, that's tough. I wish that I was older when Barry Sanders was playing because I was like 7 years old ish when he retired, 5 to 7, somewhere in there. So I've seen the clips, and listen to my dad and friends and family members tell those stories. And as somebody who lives and dies with Michigan football, Michigan basketball, and the Detroit Lions, since those days of Barry, it's been a lot
downhill.
more dying than living. A lot more dying than living with the Lions. So I wish I could have seen some of those. But when I think about my favorite experience as a fan, there's a couple things that kind of pop into my mind. But I think the difference, and almost like the cherry on top that kind of puts this one maybe at the top, is the difference between witnessing something in person versus watching it on TV. And a handful of just incredible moments that I've been, in a living room somewhere watching, or at Webfoot at the University of Oregon when Jordan Poole hits a game winner, and we'd have to check the security tapes at Webfoot to see what I did after that, because the brain kind of skipped for a second. But I think about the first ever kind of true official night game at Michigan Stadium. This was 2011. Michigan played Notre Dame at night. So already a big kind of run up to this game. Both teams wore like throwback jerseys, which was a new thing. And the refs were wearing like what looked like, what's the Canadian hat that like the Olympians wear sometimes? It starts with a B maybe.
Canadian hat. I mean, the only thing two comes to mind when I think of Canadian hat, like a bonnet. Like what are we talking about here?
Like almost like the hat that like Bryson wears when he's golfing.
Oh yeah. I don't know what they actually call that hat. Like it's like a postman's hat, or like a. Yeah, I know what you're talking about.
But regardless, so the refs are wearing these hats, right? So it's a big deal.
Yeah,
and
old school.
It was also the first game that I ever officially filmed the game for the football team. So we had played Western Michigan the week before, and I had been running tapes. Our job was we filmed the film that the coaches and the team used for scouting, right? Like they watched what we filmed is what they watched after practice, what they watched after games, how they did teaching and review and all that type of stuff. So that Notre Dame night game, it's my first game filming, and we win. Michigan wins in one of the crazier football games that I had ever seen in my life at that point. And to be in that stadium with 115,000 people, where in a span of, I believe, like the last minute and 30 seconds, Michigan takes the lead on a screen pass to my boy Vincent Smith, the pride of Pahokee, Florida. Then Tommy Rees, who is now the offensive coordinator at Notre Dame, drives the Golden Domers right down the field, scores in like 30 seconds. So all of a sudden Notre Dame takes the lead. They're up by 3 with 28 seconds left or something like that. And in 3 plays, Bernard Shoelaces drives the boys down to like the 14-yard line. There's 7 seconds left. Everybody's thinking we're going to kick a field goal to tie it to go into overtime. Bernard comes up to the line, takes the ball, pump fake, Roy Roundtree in the corner of the end zone. And I mean, pandemonium. I've never seen anything like it. I actually just got like full body chills talking about it.
And that's what sports does. Yeah.
That's talking about the degenerates that you and I are, but that's one that sticks out. The stadium afterwards stayed full for like an hour, and this is at like 1 a.m. In the in Eastern time in Michigan, and being able to share that, like my parents were at that game because as an employee of the team, you got tickets. So like my parents were there, and some of my best friends I was either working with or they were also in the stands. And so for us all to just see something that was crazy like that, and in a game that was already hyped because of the kind of external circumstances around it, and to feel a part of it as a member of the team, I suppose, right? Like, man, I haven't found one that tops that one quite yet.
And that's got to be one of the benefit of working on the team side, is actually feeling like, hey, I'm in it with these guys and gals, and it's a very cool feeling. And I can think back to a lot of in-person events that are up there for me, but you actually prompted a reminder for me is when we were in our final year at Oregon and the Raptors won the NBA Finals, and just sitting there on the outdoor patio. A lot of pints going around, a lot of pictures going around. And I know it felt like me versus the world. Everyone was cheering for Golden State. Nobody wanted to give me any of my roses, cheering for the Raptors. I'm wearing a Siakam jersey, my Corey Joseph jersey, just screaming at the top of my lungs at people to get our respect. And, did half of the Golden State Warriors have to go down for us to win? Maybe. But, that's part of our journey. And that's what makes us love sports so much. Like I get chills thinking about that too. And that's why we're in this. That's why we do the long hours. That's why we, made the sacrifices, and that's why we love it. So,
you mentioned a couple things there that I thought were interesting. One, you left out that Oregon is essentially like Cal State North. So like half of the student body is from California. So both within our grad program as well as auxiliary fans at Rennie's, which is a fine establishment.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, a lot of haters, not a lot of fans of the Rappies. That added kind of an extra like add to it. And you mentioned something interesting though about working for teams and the ability to like really feel close to those wins and losses. I've been both like on the football side as well as the business side with the Emeralds, the minor league baseball team in Eugene. And that was something that I thought was really cool, is I wasn't sure that you were going to feel that same level of attachment to wins and losses. And in my opinion, and maybe it's just because, as I've mentioned, I'm a bit of a sports junkie and degenerate when it comes to it, but I felt that same tie. And I'm curious, as you have quite the illustrious athletic career yourself, and then got to work for the Storm. Would you echo those sentiments, or do you think that there's still a little bit of a difference between that connection when you're like on the team side versus the business team side?
Yeah, it is interesting. Like you certainly feel a lot more invested, especially when, I'm going to see the GM the next day. I'm going to see the players that week. And you do really feel like, I would feel pain when the Storm would lose. And thankfully in my season with the Storm, we actually won the WWE championship, subtle brag there, but
ring season
didn't get a ring, but that's a different story.
Can't relate.
No, yeah, exactly. You got your big old ring, but having played high level sports, I certainly enjoyed not being concussed or having any tears in my shoulders or knees after big wins or losses. So, I would certainly say there was a lot of that similar feeling of camaraderie and being a part of the team. But I don't know if anything beats, being on the field or on the court and the sweat, blood, and tears that kind of go into that. So, it's a little bit of both for me. But we're wrapping up here. Ian, you've been an awesome, awesome guest. Thank you so much for joining us. This is Ian Burley, an absolute superstar in the sports world. Now, stay tuned for our next episode of What's Kraken, where we're going to talk about all things music, sports, entertainment, and fan engagement. Kraken out.